Podcast Pharma Insider Talk od Kariera w Farmacji to aktualności z rynku, wiedza od ekspertów, inspiracje i wskazówki, jak budować karierę w branży farmaceutycznej. Nazywam się Justyna Omantuk i zapraszam Cię do wysłuchania insiderskiego podcastu, dzięki któremu lepiej poznasz rynek farmacji w Polsce i na świecie. Obserwuj nasz kanał i poleć nas znajomym z branży. Pomiędzy kolejnymi odcinkami zajrzyj na www.karierawfarmacji.pl, gdzie znajdziesz wiedzę i kurs online, dzięki którym nadasz odpowiedni kierunek swojej karierze zawodowej. Zapraszam! Dzień dobry. Witam Państwa bardzo serdecznie w kolejnym odcinku Pharma Insider Talk, podcastu branżowego, w którym mówimy o tym, jak wygląda rynek farmacji w Polsce i na świecie. Dzisiejszy odcinek będzie nieco inny od tych, które dotychczas publikowaliśmy, dlatego że przeprowadzimy go w języku angielskim. Aby nie przedłużać, zapraszam Państwa na część właściwą podcastu. Hello, my name is Justyna Omantuk and I'm host of podcast for pharma market, Pharma Insider Talk. We created this podcast to give some knowledge and understanding on what's happening on medical market, pharmaceutical market, and how to develop career on this market. And today I'm really happy that I can have my guest, Anouar Hosni, who is a regulatory affairs specialist working with medical devices. In Europe, this year and last years were full of changes, and new regulations changed the way the medical devices market works. And I'm really happy that we can share some light on what's happening right now, what will happen in the future, and how the work inside looks like. So let's start. Hello, Anouar.
Hello, Justina. It's a real pleasure to join you on this podcast.
Okay, great. I'm happy as well. And before we go deeper into your thoughts about the market, I would like to ask you to tell us more about your career path. Can you tell us what do you do right now? You work at which capacity, and what are your current responsibilities?
Okay, so I'm a pharmacist. I did my studies of pharmacy in Tunisia. Then I came to France for a master's degree in regulatory affairs of medical devices. And after I started working in medical device companies in France. Currently, I'm regulatory affairs specialist with 5 years experience. And I'm currently working in a company called Essential Robotics that do a surgery solution for spine surgeries. Mixing between imaging instruments and robotic arms.
Sounds very interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of an unusual path for pharmacists to go into medical device, but it's a really exciting sector, and later I will explain why I really love medical device, and also our auditors might also pick up an interest.
Great. So the current company you are working on is a startup company, right? So you are developing new devices, new innovative ones. So what are your responsibilities in that company?
Okay, so currently, yes, I just joined a startup of 100 collaborators. Previously, my previous experiences were in multinational companies of like 50,000 employees. My current responsibilities as a regulatory affairs specialist is both to support the engineering team while they are developing a new product, meaning transmitting the regulatory inputs. So there's requirements from European regulation, from US regulation that are the main two markets because Europe and US, if you add up their markets, it's 70% of the international markets. So when you are developing a country, when you are developing a product, you want to make sure that your product is compliant to both EU and US regulation. And the requirements are in terms of safety, in terms of performance of your medical device, also in terms of traceability. So while you're developing the product, you also have in parallel to develop the documentation and determine your specifications and how to meet them in terms of regulatory purposes, but also in terms of technical specifications in order to later on prove that your product is capable of delivering the performances that you are claiming in your documentation and in your advertisement promotional documents.
So if I understood correctly, the regulatory affairs team is working alongside the engineers. So you need to somehow learn what the engineers are doing, ask them to do, like, for example, specific tests or specific like features to the product, so you will be able later on to certify the device itself, right?
Yes, so this is one of the big parts, supporting engineering teams, but also as a regulatory person, you have to determine what kind of classification your medical device have. Is it class 1, so low risk, or is it class 2 or class 3? So class 3 is the highest risk. And for high risk classes like class 3, you actually need to do clinical trials. So this kind of requirements, you have to communicate them to the team early on because it have so many implications. You have to explore on the market, is there like an equivalent medical device on which you would base your submission? This is what we call predicate device. So if you have a predicate device on the market, that makes the submission easier, but you also have to prove through documentation that in terms of safety and performance, you are equivalent to that predicate device. So that was with the engineering. Then we have the second part of the job, that is when the product is ready, functional. So we have to prepare the submission to the health authorities. In Europe, it's the notified body that gives you the CE mark for class 2A, 2B, and class 3 medical devices. And in USA, it's the FDA that gives you the regulatory approval. So the second part of the job is to build a narrative and a kind of storytelling for an external person, that is the auditor of FDA or evaluator of the FDA or evaluator of the notified body, in order to present your product to emphasize what testing, what performances have been documented, and basically to prove that your device is good to be put on the market. And their job is actually to question you, to challenge you, to make sure that you did all the required testing, that you respected all the harmonized standards to actually develop your product. So to summarize, regulatory affairs have a part of documentation. Early on in the development of the product, it's more analyzing regulations, some kind of standards to kind of communicate really early on about those inputs, either technical or also regulatory. It can also be about labeling, traceability. And the second part is really human-based, because when you interact with engineers, when you interact with external persons from authorities, it's a lot of interpersonal relations. You have to be good at convincing. Usually, for regulatory persons, push for a better documentation on the product. So this is also when you speak to engineers, explaining them to them why is it important to write down justification, why is it important to write down how we got to that result. It is actually something that it's not easy, but you do it to make the product safer and to give more credibility and confidence into your product when you submit it to regulatory authorities.
Yes, I guess it might seem that working in the regulatory affairs is mainly working with papers, but what you are describing is more like interaction with people, negotiation within the team or outside the team. So it's more complex than just working in front of the computer.
For sure. And there's also, you have to be what we say business partner, because when you have a new product to put on the market, there's a high pressure from business. So they come to regulatory person, okay, would we need clinical trials? I don't know, to get it approved in US, is it 3 months? Is it 6 months? To get it approved into Europe, is it 1 year? And also if your company is international, so you have to communicate early on the requirements, for example, from Brazil, China, Japan. And there's a huge business impact. And as I told you, the more you do testing, the more you do clinical trial, the more it's also investments that the business side have to do. And so it's not that the business people challenge you, but it's you need to be very competent and very sure about when you say this is required by regulation and we have to do it. And it's also, for me, I feel it like this give me motivation, because in medical device, there's so many types of medical device. It's not like drugs, for example. In drugs, the regulation is super clear. For medical devices, it goes from a little syringe, a little plaster, or a little testing kit, to a big MRI scanner, to a pacemaker that is implantable. So the devices are so diverse that when you read the regulation, there is some room for interpretation, because you cannot test all devices the same way. It's not like analytical chemistry for drugs, or some kind of standards in pharmacology. For medical devices, the technology can be so different from a device to another that it's also the role of regulatory affairs to communicate those some level of requirements to the business and engineers, but also try to convince them that in order to get it approved by health authorities, you actually need to have a very good level of documentation, and you're actually fighting for the safety of the product, and at the end, the safety to patients.
So it seems very hard to balance those two viewpoints, but at the end there is a patient. So for sure, like putting a lot of pressure and importance to safety is crucial. But before I go deeper into how the startup work is looking like for you, can you tell us more? What was your previous experience before? Because before that, you were working quite different kind of companies, right? And your responsibilities were quite different.
Yes, for sure. So a last point I wanted to add also on what I said earlier about the importance of this work as a regulatory person is, I always say to myself, if you give let's say a paracetamol to a patient, it stays in the body 4 hours, 6 hours, and then it's eliminated naturally. When you put, a hip implant, a cardiac valve, it stays 20, 30, 40 years into human body. So
very long
this is why it's really important. Yeah. So this is why it's really important. And to answer your question about my previous experiences, so I did work before at GE Healthcare. So it's General Electric is a very big multinational, very old one, 130 years of existence, and the healthcare business is around 52,000 people.
That's a difference from 100 workers at your current company.
Yeah, it's totally a different structure, and um, my role was really more specialized, but also the implication of the job was
Mm-hmm.
different. Um, to give you a random number, because of course I cannot communicate the real numbers, but let's say in a startup you produce, when you work in like big equipments for imaging and surgery, that can cost up to 1 million euros. Let's say you produce, I don't know, 5-6 machines a year. When you work in big companies, it's 600 to 1,000 machine per year that you produce. So yes, the work is more specific, but the implications are also higher. So in GE Healthcare, as it was an international company, my role, I was working as global regulatory
Mm-hmm.
affairs, meaning that we did, as I explained earlier, support engineering teams into developing products, also coordinating with business for all the regulatory aspects, and when can we expect to get approval in key markets as China, Japan, or US. Um, so once the documentation is ready, and once we worked with engineering teams and so on, our job was to get the product approved everywhere
Mm-hmm.
in the world. And smaller companies have distributors. Let's say you have a distributor in Brazil, one in Korea, one in Argentina. Big companies have, it's their local branches. So we were working with colleagues from GE in Argentina that were doing the
Mm-hmm.
regulatory submissions, or in Singapore. So we, the global regulatory person, is the expert of the product in terms of regulatory, and the person that is in Argentina is the expert of the Argentinian regulation. So they do submit, I don't know, in G it was maybe 150 types of products,
Mm-hmm.
so they cannot know them
Yeah, of
by
course.
heart, but they do, yeah, but they are the expert of the country. So our work was to coordinate with them in order to make the best submission to health authorities, and to answer in a timely manner and a very precise manner to health authority. When you have questions from health authority, it's also a matter of balance, as we were saying earlier. If you give too much information, you open the floor for more
Yes.
questions. But if you give too little, it's they would have questions because they didn't get it, or they want more details. So to find the right balance, also country-wise, is different. I have to say also that not all countries have, let's say, advanced regulations. Some countries, mainly developing countries, have lower requirements, like sending few documents and you get a
Mm-hmm.
license. But there's the main countries like US, Europe, Japan, China, Canada, Brazil, and Russia, Korea also. Um, the overall picture is that in the last 20 years, maybe, there's have been so many regulation on medical device. Historically, drugs have been regulated years prior to medical device, and now medical device is
Mm-hmm.
catching up, because also, it's a general thought, because also when you have a good quality medical device, it lowers the costs in hospital, it lowers the costs of complications, it ensures the safety of patients. So to give you an example, at GE, General Electric Healthcare, in 2005 there was 50 regulatory
Mm-hmm.
people, and 10 years later they were more than
Wow, that's a
200.
huge change. So you are saying about the global team, right?
Yeah, the
Mm-hmm.
global regulatory people. So if I have to describe my job, with engineers, I already did, but when you do international submissions, you work with people from around the world. So since you are based in Europe, in the morning you have to answer the emails from Asia, because if you don't answer in the morning, when you answer, I don't know, at 2 p.m., they're already sleeping, and and you lose one day. So when you receive an email at 8 or 9, you should reply before 10. So you do 2 or 3 iterations of email, and it doesn't take you 1 week to discuss something that would have taken 5 minutes on the phone.
So did you have like 10 different clocks in your office with the, cities you are working with?
No, it's not like in finance where every second you can lose billions, right? But you have to be aware. You have to be aware. It's also when you work for for US or Latin America, it's the same applies in the afternoons. You have to be reactive in the afternoons, and also there's some cultural parts, like, I don't know, sometimes you write email, the product will be developed in the summer, but you have to say European summer, because your summer is not the summer in Australia or in the summer in South Africa. So
yeah, you need to be conscious about this.
Yes, and also while working, taking into account the cultural differences, that comes with a little bit of practice and experience with it's also person related. Like, you can have two people from Brazil, completely different in personalities, but there's a general sense of cultural aspect that you have to take into account. For example, usually when you work with China, there's a higher sense of hierarchy. It's harder for them to say no when you ask something, and even if they are the experts or they are the person on the field, you really have to push them to get a no. For example, when you work with Japanese people, they are more straightforward, but they are also, if something goes wrong, they are, they would be really direct in the negative feedback, if I can put it.
Yeah. So let's focus about those differences a little bit, because now you are based in France, and in the office, in a current or previous job, you are working mainly with French people. But I know that you are working with international teams. For example, some of the people you are on daily basis in contact with were from United States. Can you tell us more about the differences in working style of those people? Elaborate more about how on everyday basis it looks like.
Yes, so I had the opportunity to work with different nationalities. Being based in France, of course, my colleagues in the office were all French, so we did speak French when we were speaking informally, but all emails and communications were in English, and I had the opportunity to have 2 direct managers that were from US. So this is my opinion, I have to say. So it's my personal intake. I don't consider it as a general truth. So in my view, with the interactions I had, in US, the culture is, they are more optimistic, enthusiastic. They give importance to their team building, and they are really, really careful with the words they say. So usually you will hear, oh, amazing work, great communication. They are really pushing like the positive side. However, when things go south, I find them really direct in feedback, saying this went wrong, this is what we need to change, this is what I need you to do. And I think that could be explained with the fact that in US it's not a big it's not the end of the world if you fail. They have that culture of let's try it. If we fail, we learn and we do it again. Or we do it. We do the same effort, but with flexing different muscles. in for example, in France, they would have more trouble into trying something if they are not sure it will go well from the start. So they do more meetings, more synchronization, more thoughts about strategy. And when, let's say, unfortunately things doesn't go well, it's more philosophical discussions, like, yeah, given the context, given the strategy, and you do 10 more meetings to analyze what went wrong. If I oppose it to the American approach, it's like, oh, great work, great team, let's try it. It fails. Okay, what went wrong? Let's try it again. So that's a difference, and we also cannot. We cannot ignore the fact that in US they have less vacations, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Yeah, less strikes than in France for sure, and less social rights actually. But I mean, it's a personal opinion. But in US, for example, big companies give, for example, maternity leave to employees. But by law, they are only required to give 2 weeks. And in France, the law requires to give 16 weeks. So yeah, that's more in the perks that you get from a country to another. But since US people don't get that much holidays, I feel like they put more hours, but French people, although taking, because in France you have 5 weeks of holidays, and usually you have 2 weeks more, so 7 weeks. Even though they take a lot of holidays, they really can relax, and when they come back, maybe not the first 2-3 days, as everyone, when you have been away for three weeks, right? You come and you find a mountain of emails, but the overall effect on a year is like they are more efficient, I feel, and more creative when you have a good balance between work and personal life. It's good. This is why, for example, in France, it's they really respect the fact that in the lunch break, usually people take 1 hour at least. Some people do take 2 hours, but usually they leave later. But the norm is less than 30 minutes. It's impossible. Like they don't like to eat at their desk. They give importance into eating healthy and also taking the time to eat and to socialize during lunch break. And this is something I appreciate.
Great. And I would like to ask you if it's possible for you to tell us more or just a few words about what were the exact devices you were working on while in a startup and in GE. I don't know if you are allowed to tell a few words about that.
Yeah, of course. The products are public and they are sold everywhere. So at GE, I was working in breast imaging, so to diagnose breast cancer, that is the first cancer in women. So the device was a mammograph. So it had X-rays, it had also software part, it had mechanical part to kind of press on the breast, and it had also electromagnetic safety requirements. So it's for example, the experience before, I worked on spine implants. So it's when you have a trauma in your spine, or for example, you have 2 vertebrae that are smashed once against another, or the intravertebral space is diminished. You actually can operate the person and put a disc to restore the distance between the spines, or to consolidate the structure of the spine with some screws. So moving from an implantable device where you had biocompatibility requirements for the materials to something so imaging device where it was not implantable, but it was X-ray, electromagnetic safety, software features. My third experience, although a bit shorter, was with Baxter, another multinational company, and I was working on hemodialysis filters. So it's the machine when you have either acute kidney failure or chronic kidney failure. It actually replaces a lot of what the kidney, the kidney function. So it's a product in contact of blood, and it actually filtrates the blood. So it's a really different kind of product, and I worked on that during COVID. And as you know, for COVID, really advanced cases, they can have acute failure of kidney in the last stages of the disease. Mm-hmm. So that made a huge demand for the product. So they had to register it in more countries, and so on. And now in my last position, so the startup, I did a mix between the spine implant, because I'm working on spine surgery solution. And also what I did at GE was imaging. So this company has imaging plus surgery.
So you're mixing all your previous experience into one place.
Yeah, and adding the robotic part.
So that's also another interesting part. And having all those experience and previously working mainly with big pharma companies and device companies, and right now in a slightly smaller with totally different working style. What are the main differences you see for your work, and how do you like both environments?
Okay, first in terms of product, and then I will talk in terms of structure.
Oh yeah, because those are two different things, right?
Yeah. Because so in terms of products, this is why I actually chose a medical device field. Because when you change from a product to another, you completely change the technology, you completely change the medical constraints. Sometimes it's implantable, sometimes it's not, sometimes it uses software, sometimes it's mechanics, sometimes it's electric. And this actually gives you a really nice challenge, and you always have to adapt. And as a regulatory person, I also have to say you are not required to be the technical expert. Your job is to understand the documentation and getting help from engineers to understanding. Then your job is to simplify it for the evaluators and the healthcare authorities. So even if you change technologies, there's no one who is an expert in electricity and then an expert in blood and then an expert in software.
That's understandable.
There's not such a degree. So also what I like as in medical device in product is usually in medical device, every 18 months to 2 years, when you get a product in the market, after 2 years maximum, there's a new product that is slightly better. I mean, they did an incrementation and they enhanced some parts. So there's a lot of competition. And also the life cycle of a product in terms of development, it's 2 years to 4 years. It's not like drugs where it can take 20 to 30 years to get a drug out. So you actually see the whole process from start, if you started the project, till the end, and you see it on the market. And this is also rewarding, and you're always working on new features, new version 2, version 3, version 4 of the product. So that was the part about products, and it's true in small companies and it's true in big companies, both. So now to speak about the second part about the structure difference between a smaller company and a small company and a big multinational. First, I would have to say that when you say small company, it can also go to 3, 4, 5, right?
Mm-hmm.
When it's just a prototype and like really, really initial phases. I didn't take part into those kind of adventures.
Yet.
Yet. But to give you my personal take on the situation is, for me it's good to start with a smaller company, because when you start with a smaller company you have way more responsibilities and you have way more impact, and you actually since you have more responsibilities, you have to talk with, I don't know, the R&D manager. You have to talk with the managers that are I don't know, if you are on a mechanical device or software device, you have to go to the people, or you have to go directly to the business person to clarify their business plan, or to medical affairs to actually have the clinical data and if it's enough for the submission. So you really have the chance to see the whole cycle of the product, and that's a good thing. And you actually also learn, because you are creating things sometimes from scratch, or sometimes from a document that over time is getting better and better. If I compare it to big corporations, so I did it in that order. I started in a small company, then went to two big companies. And in the big companies, your work is more specific, but since everyone is super specialized, when you take a decision by the processes of the big multinationals, because their processes are always really exhaustive, and they want to take all the angles, and they don't want to miss any little aspect, because, as I said earlier, if you are producing 1,000 machines that are sold for, I don't know, more than 200,000 euros, any little mistake can cost millions if you have to do a recall of the product. So the processes are really, really well designed. But the thing is, everyone brings in a small part. So when you take part of those meetings, you really understand what are all the factors that you have to take into account, and every person is actually fighting as hell for his own little turf, right? His own little impact, his own little workload, because some decisions may put more workload on his function rather than the other, because everyone is super specialized. Also, the good thing about big companies is that you have experts everywhere. So when you want some advice, or you want to check something, usually the processes are super clear. Sometimes it's even easier to read the process than to read pages and pages of articles on your own. So you have that expertise on hand. Let's talk also a little bit about the bad sides of big companies. You have to be patient, because usually when you join those companies as a junior, they have a really high rate of retention, meaning that your colleagues already have 10, 20, 25 years of experience. And since they have a big rate of retention of their employees, people stay there for those 10 years or those 15 years. So you might have colleagues that have been in your department for like 10 or 15 years without really climbing the ladder, but since they have internal promotions and internal raises, they stay in the same department. So you can be very lucky, and you arrive in a period where there's a lot of movement, so you can have more and more responsibilities, but you also can fall into the situation where your position, will be better, but not your responsibilities, or your salary will get better, but not your responsibilities. And when you actually come back to, as me, to a smaller structure, so first from GE I went to Baxter, and it was another multinational, and I felt like, let's say 80% of the processes and the way of working was the same, because it's the same kind of structure. But when I came back to smaller companies, I realized how important and how much I gain experience in big companies, because you actually think about all the little factors that enter into a decision. So when, as a regulatory person, I say we should do this, in the back of my mind, I know that this would impact manufacturing in this way, this would impact logistics in that way, this would impact marketing in that way, because we already had meetings where everyone was present and everyone was shouting, "Oh no, I want this, I want that."
So you went that path.
So, yeah, and what I realize now, coming back to a smaller company, is you actually learn more technical stuff, because you have to write, for example, reports from scratch. So you have to actually go to analyze the regulation sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph, so you are sure you didn't miss something, and you don't have an expert on hand like in big multinationals, where you can with a quick email double check something.
You need to rely on
you
yourself.
Actually have to, and you need to read a lot of things from trusted sources, sometimes on the internet or wherever, to kind of be sure about your assessment. And you also have to, once you gain more experience, for sure, you also have to form other people's, or give them some kind of, always communicate your perspective, because some people in smaller companies didn't do 20 years in medical devices, and they come from different kind of industries. It's not like a big corporation where they can hire people that already have experience and they already have tremendous CVs.
So I guess it's also a little bit connected with the motivation, because when you are working on a very small piece of cake, you are a specialist, but also I guess you see your impact on the future of the product, but it's not as much as you do in smaller companies. Does it impact your motivation to work, and do you feel better motivated in a current position?
I think in big companies, everyone reaches a certain point where he already saw all the processes, and since your perimeter of action is smaller, you feel like you're not learning that much. But it depends on people. Some people like to do the same thing over and over again. Even there's from time to, I'm not saying that it's like a manufacturing job where you're doing the same operation every day, for sure, but there's not any more big challenge. Some people, when they have families, kids, they like to take out that stress part.
I can see that.
But for example, since I'm still at the beginning of my career, for me, I reached the point where I think if I stayed a few years more, for sure, I would have learned more. For sure, I would have discovered new things or new ways to do the same tasks. but I chose to change the company to actually be on a learning curve that is way faster, because you actually have to do a lot of things yourself, and you can kind of get out of your comfort zone, and that's something hard actually.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine that there's also two important things that you need to balance. So what you want right now in your life, and this is going in the direction of the question I would like to ask, more personal, because I know that you decided to take a break and do a 1 year gap from work. Can you tell us more about what were motivation for this decision, and are you happy that you did it?
Yes, so as you said, it's more a personal note. So again, this is my take, my personal experience. I don't want to be giving lessons to everyone. It's just if you feel in the same situation that I would describe, why not asking yourself those same questions?
Yes,
So
I guess understand.
yeah. So after 3 years at the big multinational company, GE, first I started with a portfolio of products in France, and they give me a portfolio of products in South Korea, and I even traveled to South Korea, and it was going super well, and I was actually learning. But I arrived to the point where I asked myself, why did I do like medical device regulatory affairs? And while asking myself those questions, I realized I did it because I actually want to change from a product to another. I want to get out of my comfort zone and be more into implantable products like cardiac stents, intracranial valves, for example. This kind of product. This is my end goal. Also, I thought that changing the fact that you already receive reports that are, let's say, 90% ready, and you just review them, it's not the same as being part of making them and being part of educating people about regulatory issues. And as you said, Justina, when you are in a smaller company, you actually shape the product. And as I told you, it was one of my main motivations to, as a regulatory person, to kind of be that guy who is fights for the patient safety and actually have an impact on documentation, but documentation reflects the safety and performance of the product.
Yes.
So you can see it as a documentary job, but the effects are
Real life.
on real patients. Yeah, because if you do not have the right level of requirements, you might end up having super bad surprises. And in medical device, sometimes it never forgives. Like if you do, I don't know, when I was working in mammography, if the X-ray dose is super not controlled, let's say, you can give cancer to people. Or if you're in surgery of spine and your robot doesn't move well, I mean, it can have catastrophic consequences. So it's as I told you, medical device, I mean, it can be super critical for health, and it also enhances the health of people. So this is why what I'm explaining is the deep down reasons.
Yes, your motivation.
About what I change. And I also, now if I take out the professional reasons why I wanted to change and put it more into my personal perspective, in my view, before we worked until 60, then we retired at 60, and at 60 we still had some energy to do traveling, to enjoy life. However, our generation, well, currently a lot of countries now you get out on retirement at 64, 65, 67, due to the life expectancy
It's growing.
is better. Yeah, so people live until 90. So anyway, so this demographical aspect, and especially with COVID crisis now, I think that our generation will maybe end up going on retirement more close to 70.
Yes, that's
So for me, when people say, yeah, you have to really work, 30 years of career, have a big position, blah, 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 and then you will enjoy. I think that when you are 70, you don't have much energy left in you. So
that's probably true.
and time, and time, because it's a matter of energy and time. So my personal view is it depends on everyone. It can be every 5 years, it can be every 7 years, it can be every 10 years, whatever you're comfortable with. But take time for yourself to do. If you have for example, I had a project of doing a world tour, and I actually started it for 7 months. But when I was in Argentina, the COVID say, hello, I'm here, go back to your country. So for me, taking 1 year or 6 months off is not a waste from your career. It's a time you're gaining. It's life, actually, because when you go for 6 months on a trip, you can get ill, you can and I know, Justina, this will make you laugh, but you can fall from the bike if you don't know how to ride a bicycle.
This situation happens.
Yep. So it's like everyday life. There's good moments, there's bad moments. There's moment where you learn, where you open your mind, especially if you're traveling to different cultures, or maybe other people have personal projects, I don't know, in some other hobbies that they want to develop. So when I realized that I'm not losing 6 months, or I'm not losing 1 year, I'm just deciding to live this experience now, and of course I could have done that because I was sure that in regulatory affairs, and maybe Justina, you would ask me the question later.
The question I was keeping for later. Yes, that's true.
Yep. Because in regulatory affairs, I knew there was huge demand, especially with the new European regulation for medical device. So I knew I could have. Let's say I had the job stability. I wasn't a junior anymore. I had good experiences in because also sometimes it's a matter of opportunity. Sometimes you can go to a big multinational company and like do something that is really, really specific. And I don't know, if you are responsible for just Spain and you do only the submissions in Spain, it's different from the position I had where you are responsible for the launch of the product in the whole world. So you work with so many different countries, and also we were in the headquarters for mammography, so working with the experts in engineering. So you can have a first bad experience or whatever, and you feel the need to still gain more experience. It's about the right time for you. I'm not saying that after 5 years there's a deadline. I'm just saying when you feel it's the right time for you, when you already got that satisfaction of, I understand my job. I'm starting to get skills for sure. When you are just 3 or 5 years or even 8 years of experience, you're still at the beginning of a career and you have so much to learn. But don't be afraid of, I'm ruining my career because 6 months or 1 year. I don't know how is the mentality in Poland, but at least in France, the mentality is changing in that direction.
I guess that we could have left this conversation with this note, but as you mentioned before, there was one more issue that I would like to discuss. Um, I'm happy that you're saying that you find the time for yourself to stop and you enjoyed this time, even though it was during the COVID. Can you tell us more about those new regulations regarding medical device market?
So I think Justina, we did the right flow, because if I would have talked about only technical things, maybe we would have lost some people. But now we did a little personal
Exactly.
note, so now we can come back on more technical stuff. So uh, just a quick introduction for maybe people who are not used to the regulatory field for medical
Exactly.
devices. So in Europe, you just submit your product to what we call a notified body. It is a private company, and that company is accredited by the health authority of the country where it has its headquarters. Let's say GEMED, so it's the French notified body, is accredited by the French ANSM, so it's the health authority. The same goes for Poland, the same goes for Germany. So once you submit the product to that notified body, he actually carries on the work of controlling the documentation, and he delivers what we call a CE certificate. So you can put a CE mark on your product. And the main mechanism of CE marking is to enhance the competitivity of European companies, meaning that you only do the submission once, and you don't have to do 27 submissions in each country of the European Union. It also harmonizes the standards, because before the directive for CE marking for medical devices, every country had his own requirements that were different from a country to another. So that actually harmonized the level of requirements for medical device, and everyone needs to meet a minimum level of safety and performance in order to put his product
So
on the
it's starting
market.
to be
So
more like with the drugs, right?
yeah, so in Europe, the main regulation that was enforced is called the directive. So it's a European directive, the 93/42, and as its number says, it's dated from 93. And there's a new regulation that was voted in 2017, because if you see the level of technology in 93 before the boom of internet, and you see the kind of technology that we have in our medical devices, with software, with artificial intelligence, with hospitals that are investing more and more into digital solutions, it almost like 6 or 7 centuries
Yes,
ago
totally different
in,
world.
in terms of technology. So the European Union decided to put a higher bar to the regulatory compliance for products. So the main changes in this new regulation versus the ones that were already in the directive. First, there's a huge focus on clinical data. So now for devices that are high risk, like class 3 or implantable devices, it's almost impossible to get your product approved if you do not have clinical data on them.
Which is great.
And they actually, yeah, which is great. Just to give you like an idea, for example, in US, so it's regulated by FDA, and like FDA has a big credibility, and it's one of the major healthcare agencies in the world. They received in 2019 4,500 dossiers, and 80% of those dossiers use the procedure called 510K, where it's not required to submit clinical data, meaning FDA might request it, but usually you do not need to submit clinical data. And only 5% of them went through what we call PMA, so pre-market approval, and those dossiers need clinical data before being approved. So the evolution of regulation in Europe is to do more clinical trials, more clinical data for high-risk devices. You cannot mention the data of your competitor if you do not have a written contract. Now they actually require a written contract between competitors, so that your competitor gives you the right to access all his documentation.
That's nice.
And everyone knows that no competitor will ever sign that. So what actually happens is, if you do not have your product in-house or in the same group, you would actually need to do clinical trials, because no competitor will give you their data. So, as I said, first, a big focus on clinical data, and also on post-market surveillance. Companies have more responsibility. I mean, they already had them, but now the regulation imposes a kind of annual reporting for high-risk devices, and it's more harmonized. It's not like it's not up to the notified body now to judge if it's good or not. There's like more harmonized standards, and the notified bodies themselves got way more regulated. Before there were 76, and after the huge scandals, I don't know if some of the audience heard about the PIP, the scandals for mammal implants.
Can you just give a brief description of the situation?
It was breast implants, and it was a small company in France, and they actually, instead of using medical grade silicone, they put industrial silicone, and it affected around 100,000 women around the world. And the rate of the failure of that breast implant, and of course breast implant for aesthetics, right? It wasn't the reconstruction. I mean, because there's breast implants for reconstruction, it was the aesthetic implants. So the rate of failure was twice higher than it should be.
Huge.
So it was 2012, and it was the biggest healthcare trial on court, and it added to 48,000 people who were victims that went on trial. Together in different courts, but overall on the same issue. So that big political scandal made the European regulators tighten their control on notified bodies. So now it's not only the national health authority that controls it. Let's say if you are based in Hungary or Slovakia or France, it's your national authority who controls it. Before, now, in addition to the national control, they are making a European control. Some experts appointed from the European Commission that would actually control those notified bodies that are private companies. We have to state it. So the number went from 76 notified bodies to 56 after the scandal and when European Union tightened the controls. And now with the new regulation, they are only 20.
Okay, that's huge change.
So only the notified bodies that already had the right processes and the right resources and can prove that they do not have interest conflicts and so on. I mean, there's a lot of requirements. The second thing that the third thing that the new regulation brought is a European database for medical device. So you have to register your medical device, and it has a unique number, and you have to declare all your device vigilance. It's like pharmacovigilance, but for devices, it's device vigilance on that platform. If you have a clinical trial, you have to publish it on that database. And also your reports for post-market and a lot of things have to be uploaded on that European database. And the big advantage of that is it's accessible to health authorities that have the role to do the surveillance on the European market for medical device. So it's an IT tool, and now with just few clicks, the authority has all the information they want.
Easy.
It's not like before, that they had to write to the Spanish had to write to the German, please give me this, or send a correspondence to the manufacturer that is based in Germany. And also it reduces the workload for health authorities, meaning if you have a clinical trial or device vigilance, now there's a mechanism where health authorities can coordinate the review, and instead of 5 authorities reviewing the same folder separately, they can appoint a coordinator, and they kind of split the tasks anyway. So it's better. It's IT tool. It streamlines the process. It gives more direct access to health authorities for information, for better control. And I would end up with one point, because of course the regulations have so many good evolutions but we don't have the time to go through them all. So the last point I wanted to talk about was that they did a European group of experts. So each country named 2 people on it. And though that European group of experts actually he drafts the guidance for all the medical device aspects in terms, of cybersecurity. It can be on classification. It can be on clinical trials. So you have a European reference. Before, what happened with directive is you ask your notified body, and depending on the opinion of the experts of the notified body, they say yes or no. And then they deliver the CE certificate. Now the notified bodies have also to follow this European group of experts, and there's a sense of more control. If I have to wrap it up, there's a sense of more control, more coordination, more harmonization, and a big focus on clinical data and post-market surveillance.
That's great. And there are also other implications of this new regulation, and the new implications are regarding employee market. And this is something you mentioned before. Can you tell us from your perspective, is it easier to find a job? How the market works right now?
So for regulatory jobs in medical device, it was already the demand was super high, because there's not a degree or a university that forms you to be a regulatory person. So the fact that, as I said earlier, a lot of geographies, a lot of countries in the world are having stricter regulations that made the need higher. And now with the new European regulation, let's not forget that in Europe, according to official numbers, there's 32,000 medical device companies in Europe. That's huge. Most of them, 95% of them, are small or medium enterprises, the overall employees in medical device is 760,000 employees. It's almost the same number as pharmaceutical companies in Europe. So it's super equivalent. And this new regulation brought a huge need in regulatory, because, as I was explaining earlier, there's so many new requirements. Also, a requirement for traceability that I didn't talk about, that every device need to have a unique identifier, as in drugs, and so on and so on. So the thing is, this new regulation will replace the directive. So if by 2024, if your device is not certified according to the new regulation, you cannot sell it anymore.
Yes, that's huge change.
So all the products that are on the market right now have to be compliant to the new regulation by 2024. They can be distributed until 2025, but after 2025 they have to disappear from the market. If they are on the shelf of the hospitals, yes, they can stay, but you cannot sell new ones. So if you don't sell, so your company cannot survive, and if it cannot survive, they have a huge interest and need to hire a regulatory person to kind of do that transition. So the regulatory needs for companies, especially smaller companies that need counseling and consulting people to kind of ramp up to this new regulation. And I also wanted to add that medical device sector is one of the most innovative sectors. The official numbers is that in 2018 there were 14,000 patents in medical device filed. That's twice than the drugs and twice also than the biotech, and it ranks this as the second sector, just a little bit behind the IT communication sector that files a lot of patents as well. So what I'm saying here is, since it's a sector that has a lot of innovation, a sector where after 2 years your product is not the best because there's one that did a small incrementation, getting new products all the time on the market, and especially with the new regulation, is getting harder, and that creates the need for regulatory experts. And the last point that I would add, regulatory is really specific to the product, because if you work, I don't know, in a product that is mainly software, it's not the same that working in a product that is implantable in the body. It's not the same that working on a device that is mainly electrical. So the expertise you gain is really specific. It's not like, I don't know, quality people that the standards for quality are almost the same, and they can apply what they learned here to another structural organization, because it's the same processes for quality. In regulatory, since you submit the product, you have to really know well the product. This is why the knowledge of regulatory is scarce, and that scarcity makes the need for jobs more, and the salaries a bit better.
So for you and for other fellow experts in medical device market, there are good times ahead. And as a last question, but you partially answered this one already, what are the prognoses for the medical device market? What is going to happen in a few years? Is it going to grow?
Yeah, so it's very good times for regulatory people, but also busy times.
Yes, that's true.
Because it comes with responsibilities, of course. And on a bigger scale, so for the medical device sector, the medical device sector have been always growing for the last years. It have a growth, at least in Europe, of between 2 to 5% every year. The projections is that it will continue growing, because the need for health, as for drugs, never fades away. It's actually getting more and more and more, because it follows the demographics. And now, because medical device, it's products, but it's also services, and it's also now with digital health that opens a huge new chapter, and with artificial intelligence also it opens a whole new chapter. To give you an example, medical device is really tied to evolution of technologies. For example, before, when you put a pacemaker implant it into someone, after, I don't know, let's say 7-8 years, you have to take it out, change the batteries. Now, with the technologies, even for phones, when you put a phone over a phone and it charges, so they apply that technology for pacemaker. They put a charger over your skin, and it actually charges the batteries of the pacemaker without even having to do a surgery to take
amazing.
it out. Yeah, so what I'm saying is the technologies is evolving everywhere. Now we have microchips, we have artificial intelligence. The hospitals are getting more and more sophisticated. So the future of medical device is in a good shape, because first, demographics, and second, the technology is booming, and medical device is all about technology.
Thank you. Thank you for this final note, and thank you for the entire discussion. I guess that during this longer than hour talk, you are able to share a lot of knowledge and a lot of your unique perspective on the market, for which I would like to thank you. And I hope you inspired a lot of people, and maybe we'll have more people interested in career in medical devices thanks to you.
Thank you, Justina, for giving me this opportunity for sharing. I hope that more and more people pick up an interest in medical device for the what is it, and for sure it's a pleasure, and also transmitting knowledge. It doesn't make your knowledge less. It actually it doesn't divide it. It makes it greater.
Thank you very much.